Go ahead, take a look at your desk. I bet there's one sitting there. It's one of the most common, most universal tools ever made. But that humble little object has this incredible hidden story. A story of chemistry, innovation, and, believe it or not, a surprisingly dark history. So let's peel back the layers and uncover the untold story of the pencil.
Just think about that for a second. John Steinbeck, who was obsessed with his pencils, literally sharpened his way through over 300 of them just to write one single masterpiece. And he wasn't the only one. Vladimir Nabokov wrote everything in pencil. Vincent van Gogh would only use Faber pencils. For centuries, this simple tool has been absolutely fundamental for capturing human creativity.
We all know what pencils do, right? They help us build entire worlds and sketch out the future. But what is a pencil, really? What kind of complex journey did it take from a bunch of raw materials to the instrument you're holding in your hand? Well, that's the story we're about to dig into. To really understand the pencil, we've got to take it apart. Because what looks like just a simple stick of wood and lead is actually this carefully engineered thing, a mix of materials where each part has its own fascinating backstory.
Okay, so a pencil basically breaks down into 5 main components. You've got the lead that we write with, the wood casing, the paint, that little metal band called the ferrule, and of course the eraser. But don't let that simplicity fool you. Each and every one of those pieces has its own journey and tells a part of a much, much bigger story.
Let's start with the absolute heart of the pencil, its core. This is where all the magic happens. And, you guessed it, it's also the source of the pencil's most stubborn myth.
All right. Right off the bat, let's get this crystal clear. There is zero lead in your pencil. The core is made of a completely non-toxic mineral called graphite. Now, those old stories about lead poisoning from pencils, that wasn't about the core. That was sometimes about the lead-based paint they used on the outside, decades and decades ago. The part you actually write with, it's always been perfectly harmless.
So the story of graphite really kicks off in 1564, when this huge, incredibly pure deposit was found in England. It was so pure, you could literally saw it into sticks and write with it. But it was also super rare. The real game changer came in 1795. See, France was under a blockade and couldn't get that English graphite. So an officer in Napoleon's army, Nicolas-Jacques, figured out you could mix graphite powder with clay and then bake it. This was huge. It not only saved graphite, but it also let them create different levels of hardness, a method we pretty much still use today. Then, a few decades later, a new discovery in New England is what really launched the American pencil industry.
Okay, so if it's not lead, why on earth do we all call it pencil lead? Well, the name is basically a 500-year-old mistake. When that graphite was first discovered in England, chemistry was, still in its infancy. They called the stuff plumbago, which is Latin for lead ore, because they really thought it was just a type of lead, and the name just stuck. Even today, the German word for pencil is Bleistift, which literally means lead pen.
But here is the absolute wildest secret identity of graphite. It's pure carbon. Just like a diamond. The only difference is how those carbon atoms are arranged. In graphite, they form these loose sheets that just slide off easily onto your paper. But in a diamond, those exact same atoms are locked into this super rigid lattice, creating one of the hardest substances on Earth. So yeah, the core of your pencil is chemically identical to the world's most famous gemstone. Crazy, right?
All right, let's move from the core to the casing that holds it, because this is where the story of the pencil takes a much, much darker and often ignored turn.
You can't just use any old wood for a pencil. It has to meet some very specific requirements. It needs to be soft enough that you can sharpen it easily, but still be durable. It can't splinter into a mess. And most importantly, it needs to have a long, straight, even grain to hold that fragile graphite core safely inside.
Back in the 19th century, there was one tree that was absolutely perfect for the job, the eastern red cedar. And the very best red cedar, the kind that grew tall and perfectly straight, was found almost exclusively in one region, the American South.
And this right here is where we encounter the pencil's deeply unsettling connection to American history. As the historian Augustine Sedgwick points out, the pencil industry, which was mostly based in the North, was directly dependent on a supply chain that started in the South and was operated by enslaved people.
The connection was incredibly direct. The same land that was prized for cotton plantations was also covered in these red cedar forests. To clear the way for cotton, those forests were cut down by enslaved workers. That very same cedar was then harvested and prepared, often by that same enslaved workforce, before it was shipped north to pencil factories. And ironically, that included the factory run by the family of the famous abolitionist Henry David Thoreau. The simple pencil was, for many people unknowingly, completely entangled in the machinery of slavery.
So, from these complex and frankly fraught raw materials, an incredibly efficient industrial process emerged to bring all the pieces together into the finished pencil we all recognize today.
The modern process is actually pretty elegant. It starts with slats of cedar, and a machine carves perfect little grooves into them. Then, the graphite cores are laid right inside. Next, a second groove slat is glued on top, creating what they call a pencil sandwich. This whole block is then put under immense pressure to make sure it's bonded securely before a saw slices it up into individual pencils. Then finally, a few coats of paint, a brand stamp, and the ferrule and eraser are added to complete the journey.
And the result of this super efficient process? It's a number that is just staggering. Today, factories around the globe produce roughly 14 billion pencils every single year. But the story doesn't just stop at the factory door. Nope. The finished pencil itself carries its own set of cultural traditions and little quirks, small details that are anything but accidental.
For example, have you ever stopped to wonder why the classic American number 2 pencil is always yellow? Yeah, that is definitely not a random choice.
It was actually a stroke of marketing genius. Back in the 1890s, an Austro-Hungarian company called Gogh wanted to create the world's best, most expensive pencil. To show off its superior graphite, which came from Asia, they painted the pencil yellow, a color associated with royalty and the Far East at the time. The yellow pencil became a status symbol, and American competitors quickly copied the color to make their own products seem just as fancy. Okay, so what about that other essential feature? The eraser on the end. That wasn't always there either. So back in 1858, a man named Hyman Lipman actually patented the idea of attaching an eraser to a pencil. But the Supreme Court eventually struck it down. They ruled that you can't patent the idea of just combining two things that already exist. That decision opened the floodgates, turning the attached eraser from one guy's invention into a universal feature of the modern pencil.
So the next time you look at a pencil, you're not just seeing a simple tool, you're seeing an artifact of pure geologic chance, of wartime innovation, brilliant marketing, and a dark, complicated economic history. It's a tool for creativity, born from this incredible web of global connections. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other objects are sitting on your desk right now with their own untold stories just waiting to be explained?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more How Meets History.